Hey everybody, welcome to Fatso Radio. This is episode number 55, and today I have a special guest, Karin Linquist. Karin, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karin, for coming. Yeah, so Karin is I gotta say, I guess you run the website, Bovine Practicum, is that right?
Hi, yes, it's my website.
Awesome. And
Yeah,
then there's a couple blogs as well, right?
yeah, definitely.
Awesome. So Karin, if you want to just kind of give us a bit of an intro, maybe a bit of a background, and then kind of what you do, and then what you're passionate about, because I have a lot of good questions for you. So welcome to
Sure.
the show again.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll start. I guess I'll start right from the very beginning. I come from a mixed farm, so my mixed family farm from northern-ish Alberta. The I Mixed family farm means my folks we backgrounded or we fed stocker steers for the local feedlot, and we also grew kind of cash feed crops of barley and canola, and been doing that until my dad passed away unexpectedly about 12 years ago, and now we kind of have it as rental, as mostly crops. Um, I took I have an animal science degree from the University of Alberta. It's actually Bachelor of Science in Agriculture and Animal Science major, with an unofficial minor in rangeland, pasture management, forage management, plant ID, that kind of thing. So plants are my pretty favorite things to learn about.
Awesome. Awesome.
I did a little bit of work with the U of A as a research assistant with rangelands, as well as with crops and soil science. So that was a very interesting journey with that. And currently I'm working as a forage and beef specialist with the province, as a as a person that basically helps farmers with their questions and everything from hay, the problems with hay, to a little bit of nutrition with beef cattle.
Okay. So at what point do they call you in normally, or what point in the farmer's life are you involved, I guess, at the beginning, during the life, or
Every from when they're going to be putting seed into the ground to when they're feeding the animals.
wow.
So it's
So it's
all year round. I get variety different questions. Like this time of year, there's still a lot of feed rations that, or diets for cattle that farmers are still asking about, trying to get some things going for them as far as what kind of minerals they need, whether animals need salt, what nutrient value the feeds have. So everything from hay to straw to silage, green feed, which is a kind of type of hay.
okay.
Um, to In a few months, I'll be getting questions about seeding forages and so on and so forth. So
Yeah.
it's quite a variety. I get quite a
Yeah.
variety in them, I tell you.
Absolutely. I bet. So if you can maybe lay it out for us, Karen, because I think that the average Joe Blow like me, right? We don't really know what cows eat, and we don't really know how they get fed and what's their cycle like. So is it easy to take maybe like a year snapshot and say like what do they eat in that course of the year, and does it change? And what do you know, the average Joe like me? What do I need to know that maybe I don't know? Because I've been under the impression now with the last couple of years that grass is great, everything else is bad, and it's got to be more nuanced than that, right?
Well, that's a can of worms to open up there.
Or maybe okay. Let's talk about the first question, then we'll talk about the grass later.
Yeah, no, I could certainly talk about that. Um, just so I guess from kind of looking at the cycle. Usually, I kind of start from springtime. So
Okay.
springtime is a really good place to start with that. Um, Usually, animals were try to encourage producers to put their animals out on grass when the grass is at a certain stage, and that's kind of where that starts. So they're basically grazing. They're grazing,
Amazing.
not just grass, but they're also grazing. Sometimes they have legumes like alfalfa, clover. There's I could get into some other legumes, like there's out here. There's um, some legumes that are, when I get into the legume part.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually two different types of legumes. I mean, there's different species.
Okay.
There's the bloat causing ones, which
The
farmers
ones
are
that
very concerned about.
the ones that I don't eat either, probably.
So bloat, in other words, is where say the animals eat something like alfalfa and clovers are notorious for causing bloat. And what happens to the animals is that they eat is when they eat so much of it at a time, the there's these tiny little bubbles fill up in the rumen, and with these bubbles they become kind of so slimy that they do not break. And when these masses of bubbles build up and build up and build up, and it's because primarily because the microbes are taking advantage of the protein, and the cell walls are basically so easily broken by the microbes that they can access the cell wall contents, which have a lot of nutrients with them. So the microbes they attack that, and they form these bubbles, and they're part of the bubbles. And these bubbles they're very very tiny, like they're so itty bitty, right? And they build up so much so fast, like it can take probably an hour or even less, or you
Wow.
know and so that the rumen gets so big, and it's so distended that it puts pressure on the animal's lungs. And if the farmer doesn't get in there and save the animal by um, putting in basically sticking a tube down the animal's throat, has
Wow.
to be done, and putting something like a mineral oil or a dish soap down there to break up those bubbles,
Wow.
then then the 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 rumen just keeps building and building and building, and basically the animal dies of internal asphyxiation. So
Wow.
they basically suffocate to death if they don't get saved, and it happens very quickly.
Wow.
So that's a very scary thing, especially when you got animals that when you don't when a farmer isn't managing. I call managing properly is in um, putting the animals out in the afternoon, because moisture adds to the ability of those plants to be more able to be easily digested versus in the afternoon.
Okay.
And when the plants are a bit more mature, so they're a lot more flowered, they're not very leafy,
Okay.
and when the animals are hungry. So if they put them out when the animals are hungry, they're going to gorge themselves. They're just going to be like, hey, free meal, I'm going to go for it.
Gotcha.
And that's when you get a lot of issues. So um that kind of scares them. But always when I get calls like that, I got to tell them, make sure the animals are not hungry, put them out in the afternoon,
Wow.
that kind of thing.
Okay.
So that's what they primarily with alfalfa, and of course different clovers, also like white clover. The red clover is also bad for bloat, and I think some of the sweet clovers are also just as bad.
Okay.
Then you get into some other legumes that don't have the bloat potential. Sainfoin has these condensed tannins, which I forget the whole science behind that, but they help with reducing so basically slowing down the microbes' ability to eat up that protein so quickly in the rumen.
Okay.
Then there's another legume called Sicer milk vetch, which is it doesn't have any tannins, however, it is a bloat-free legume because the cell walls are thicker than alfalfa, and they take a lot more effort for those human microbes to break up into.
Okay.
So that means that they're quite safe. And there's a third one, and I mean it escapes my memory.
Okay.
Those are
So
the two main ones.
yeah. So when you mention legumes, now that's in the regular grazing, right? Do they encounter these legumes? So this just in the wild they would encounter these type of things
Oh
as
yeah.
well.
Well, absolutely. Like a lot of in rangelands, like there's different milk vetches. There's different varieties of vetches I've seen out there. Pea vines. Um, I'm trying to think offhand. I've seen there's also in down south. There's also the local not local weed is another one. That's not a four, but it's actually a poisonous plant. Um, and then down south, I'm trying to think. I think it's a locust. I may be wrong in that one.
Now, does that separate or differentiate itself from a grass? Oh, so legumes aren't grasses.
Yep. No, they're not
Wow,
grasses.
so, this is a whole,
They're
so we're not even got into grass yet.
they're actually called broadleafs or
Wow,
forbs.
Forbes.
So they have a different growing uh, habit than grasses do,
Okay.
and they look, they look, obviously look quite different. Like clover, you can notice if you look in your lawn and you see this patch of three leafed, the round leafed, and they come in threes. That's clover.
Okay.
That's a legume.
Okay.
Nitrogen fixer,
Wow.
which are great for that. Versus grasses, which have the very parallel long leaves. That's quite distinctive.
Okay.
So yeah. So if you think of a legume, think of also peas,
Like
beans.
beans. Okay. Yeah.
So they're in the same family.
Gotcha. Okay. So then is it safe to say that the grazing would be maybe the default state, right? Say in the spring, I guess if we go back to that cycle, I guess the grazing would be default, like nature, I guess, or
It's basically default because that goes from um, say around, it depends on where you are, because for especially here in Alberta, grazing can start from way up north, like up in the Peace Country, that doesn't start till maybe July, and started July, whereas further south around Lethbridge area, that may begin about 1st of May, I think,
okay.
is when it starts. Um so that's basically the day one of the whole forage and beef cycle is
Okay.
what you call it. And so that's when the animals are getting off of the winter feed, and they're starting to be at the time when they may be looking like crap, like they may be little bit thin than what some guys would want, and pasture is a perfect opportunity over. Oh, this in Canada here, it's like anywhere from 4 to maybe 6 months, if you're lucky,
Okay.
a period for the animals to basically put on a nice bit of fat, if they're raised right, and to kind of ready themselves for wintertime. And and so when and so for Canada, when we start looking in terms of forages by itself, and the grasses, a lot of most grasses that grow up here, and this includes in the rangelands as well, the native pastures, is a lot of them are called cool season grasses or
Okay.
seed grasses, and their peak, they really like to grow in the cool part of the year. So basically, from when the snows and the frost just barely starts leaving the ground, they're already shooting up
Wow.
so little um, little blades, and then their growth really peaks out come about June, and then by the time it starts getting hot, like July, August, then they slow down. They're kind of going into dormancy. They basically go to sleep, kind of thing, until in some species they pick up again in the fall.
Wow.
So most opportune time for really great grazing for really good quality here, especially here in Canada, because of those cool season grasses, is from basically, let's say, around my where I live here in Stettler, Alberta, is from May to June, possibly to July, and that's like when if the producers are really grazing well, they're not just throwing the animals out using the Columbus method of putting the animals out in the spring and then discovering them in the fall. Then if they're grazing and they're moving the animals around, they're really having to quickly move those animals so that they can keep up with the grass. Because otherwise, if they don't keep up with that grass, that the main purpose in life of any plant is to produce seed, no matter whether it's a perennial or an annual. Um, and grasses are notorious for really shooting up, getting ready to shoot up a nice seed head, to spread those seeds and to start producing, to get themselves ready for maybe next year, or maybe fall, to start producing another seed, another new little plant in the ground again. Um, Other times, if but however, if the guy is really good about keeping ahead of that, or keeping up with it, um, then the other the other way a plant or a grass plant can kind of reproduce. They actually do two types of reproduction. I'm kind of getting a little off, but that's fine.
Oh, that's
Um,
okay. Yeah.
there's sexual reproduction, which is, the producing the seed. They open pollinate. They get pollinated by the wind, and then there's asexual reproduction, which is where they produce what's called a tiller. And at the little bit at the root there, sometimes if you're really good in the lawn, you can dig up a root and you can see these tiny little points that are coming up from the crown. Basically, those are tillers. Those are where another daughter grass plant is going to grow up and
Wow.
produce another plant alongside of that. There, so the two types of grasses that Rick had talked about in 51, I think it was episode 51, um, where the sod grasses, the sod forming grasses, and the bunch grasses both produce tillers.
I see.
Um, the only thing is that sod grasses, they produce what are called rhizomes, which grow underground, and they'll put up a little tiller here, 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 kind of thing.
Okay.
Whereas bunch grasses, they're in a nice bunch, and there's a little tiller here, 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 here. For example, in range class, one of my professors uh, had got I think it was a grad student, uh, to count the number of tillers on a plains rough fescue plant, and they found 200, at least 200 tillers on that one bunch.
Does that mean each tiller can potentially have another plant? Wow. Okay.
Yes,
So that's a
absolutely.
very valuable plant.
Yeah, very, very valuable. Those plants are many, many years old. Like they're some of the oldest plants, and
So,
and
so it sounds like one of the things that, I mean, I guess a good farmer would need to do is strategically plant, right? I guess, or strategically seed. That's what you were saying about seeding grasses, and I guess plan it out so during the year you have the right grasses at the right times, like grows at the right time. That will, I guess, supply your herd. What happens when you can't rely on the grass from your, or from a, from the grass from your land now, and you have to bring in grass? At what point does that happen? Like, and what I mean, like, does that happen at a certain time of the year, like you said, in July or August or September, or what's the next stage, I guess?
great question. I'll actually, your first statement kind of helped, kind of probably kind of set the stage, which is really grateful. Um, that's the importance. That's where diversity, having a, a pasture where there's not just one species of grass in there, to help kind of balance things out. So if you're having um, so for a great pasture would be one where you have maybe about 10 10 different species, that kind of thing, to kind of help. But if they're all cool season grasses and everything's going to be shutting down by July, August, that's basically when the grazing really has to slow down quite a bit. Um, the the uh, it, it base and basically the it's just so much that you can't really take so much. You kind of have to just be careful about returning too soon, otherwise you're going to be overgrazing the plants, because overgrazing is a function of time, not number of animals. It's basically when the animals are given too much of an opportunity to take two bites of a plant instead of just one.
Yep.
So that's where you can land yourself in a lot of trouble. And um, when when you're not, so I mean, when you're running out of pasture, basically that's kind of your question was, if you run out of
I
pasture,
guess so. Yeah.
which can happen. Yes, it
Okay.
certainly can happen if you made a mistake of having maybe having too many animals. Maybe you push the pasture a little bit too hard, so on and so forth. Then, yeah, then maybe bringing in some hay to help supplement those animals,
Okay.
um, or even some feed pellets, alfalfa pellets, that kind of thing to help supplement the animals to kind of slow them down, to fill them up a little bit more rather than just them relying more so much 100% on that forage.
Okay.
It's gonna help.
Funny enough, I think that question that I asked you probably showed more of my ignorance than anything. Now, here's a follow-up question. If that doesn't happen all that often, hopefully not, right? It sounds like you're saying it doesn't happen or it shouldn't happen that often. What happens in the cooler months in November, December, January, February? The average person like me doesn't know probably that cows can go in and get the grass. Do
Yeah,
they go in and find the grass?
yeah.
So,
It's it especially here. I mean, I think on Ontario, you get a bit of snow here. There, um, if a lot of the times it's so hard from basically from the time the snows come, it can be to the point where it's basically impossible for those animals to dig deep enough down
okay,
and get some snow. It gets
okay,
some not snow and to get some grass to eat because that's and the other thing too is that with these freeze and thaw cycles that have been happening in the last I've noticed in probably 10 years or so, and that snow crust over it's not that light fluffy snow which is so easy for animals to dig into becomes crusty, becomes hard. Those cows, they don't want to dig into
wow,
there. They can't dig in. They're not horses. They don't can't paw. um so they always use their noses just like bison do. If they know, if cows don't know, then they're just gonna be standing out there mooing and wondering where the feed is. They can be a little stupid like that. And then
I suppose
that's
that's why we eat them and they don't eat us.
yeah. And that means that you'd have to basically uh supplement and feed them hay, feed them
Okay.
whatever you have on hand, kind of thing. However, there has there's been a more and more farmers have been trying to do a lot more winter, what they call winter grazing. So they prepare beforehand. That's basically, that's why I say spring is basically day one from for the forage cycle, because from that time forward, they're actually farmers are preparing themselves for winter grazing. So they maybe they might be able to do some what are called stockpile grazing, where they leave a pasture for basically all year long to grow up to reach maturity for those plants to set seed and so on and so forth, so that the animals can come in the fall, come in early winter time when the snows are not so deep for them to be able to graze. Now a cow can graze about a foot um into the snow. So she, as long as she can actually graze up past her eyes, but she doesn't like grazing past her ears because she needs to hear. She's a prey animal. She needs to listen for predators and that. So it's just a instinctual thing. Um, However, if the snows get too deep or if stockpile grazing is not an option, there's other options. There's um, guys use what's called swath grazing, and swath grazing is basically uh, raising an annual crop like barley, like oats, or even polyculture crops where there's a different mix of species from oats, hairy vetch, some, mm, you know, mustard, brassicas. You get your uh, turnips and kale and that the leafy stuff
Yeah.
that actually got the cows really like to eat.
Okay.
And they grow them up, and just before the especially the cereals, before their seeds get too hard, which is what we call a hard dough stage, which is basically the stage where most cereals are going to be combined. They're going to be harvested for their grain. So cutting before then, when you squeeze the kernels, and when you squeeze the kernels, there's going to be, it's not quite milky, but it's squishy, like a bunch of white stuff comes squishing out. It's like it's less gross than popping a pimple, let me tell you.
Okay. Take your word for it.
and and that's perfect stage, or in the plants get a nice lovely golden green color. That's when it's perfect to cut. And as long as they don't have wildlife problems, because I know I've heard of wildlife problems, elk, and they love to eat that stuff. But in a perfect, in an ideal world, when they don't have those problems, cut they cut them into swaths, and by the time winter comes around, uh they set out certain areas of the field for the animals, for the cows to go in it and to graze. And then they move those cows onto swaths. They move in basically perpendicular to the swaths, every day or every 3 days. Some even like to go once a week, which is fine as long as the animals are adapted to it. And then there's bale grazing, which is where they take hay bales, set them out in the field. They set them certain width and length apart from each other. They don't necessarily take a field that has been hayed and leave the bales out to do that. They have to use a tractor to move the bales a certain line, so that they can move the fence so that the animals can have certain amount of bales to
Okay.
eat. And that's really good. The bale grazing is pretty good, especially if you get some really deep snow. It's also
Okay.
pretty, actually all of these are really great for putting down litter and organic matter and that.
Nice.
And the third last one is what's called corn grazing. And corn grazing is where the corn is let to grow up. It's not harvested, it's just standing. And the cattle go in there and they're selected. They're just like with swath grazing, just like with bale grazing. They're allowed a certain area for them to eat a certain amount of corn. And what the animals do they'll eat the cobs first. I've actually watched a cow take her tongue, wrap it around, tear off the cob, and eat, and basically husk it and eat the husk, then eat the leaves.
Everything.
And the cow will actually go in with her chest. She'll knock down a tall 10-12 foot corn plant and take the cob, and then
Wow.
she'll eat the tassels and the leaves and all that. It's really neat,
Wow. So
actually.
eat the whole plant. They'll eat everything.
Oh yeah, basically everything except for the stem. They don't really like the stem so much, but if you gotta force them to eat it, they will eat it. But
Wow. Well, it's a good reminder of like they'll eat most of the stuff that we don't eat. Like, that's what people think. I think we forget that a lot of times.
yeah.
um, well, that's awesome. Thank you. So I do have a question now. And are you? So I guess is your? I look at kind of the life of beef, right? There's two segments, or segments, I guess rather. The when they're growing up and then the finishing, right? I mean, that's because I'm just a consumer. Now, is it that simple from your standpoint as well? Is there one stage, kind of the grazing stage, or is it, I don't know what that stage is called, but is then the finishing stage? So I want to talk about that finishing stage. What does that mean, and how has that changed over the years as well? Um,
Okay, well, there's the cow calf, right?
Cow
So
calf,
there's
okay.
there's a cow calf section, which is the cows are there. They're fed to produce a calf. The calf stays with them for 6 to 10 months. The most producers are moving towards weaning calves at 8 months, 8 to 10 months, so that the cows get a few months break prior to the next calf that they get. Um, and then those calves, when most of the calves that are raised for beef, they're going to be um, most of them are what are called backgrounded, and that's what my family did. So what backgrounding is that it's where the focus on feeding those calves is for muscle, not for fat. Because if you feed them for fat, for energy, they're going to get so butterball fat that they're just fat and there's not much muscle on them. And the meat cutter, the slaughter facilities, they got so much fat they got to trim off and not much meat to sell. So so the operation that I grew up on was where our main focus was feeding a lot of forage. So there was a lot of grazing, there's a lot of feeding hay, silage. Our barley silage was fed, which is pickled. That's that beautiful, nice pickled stuff. It's actually my favorite smell. One of my favorite smells. Some people think it's gross. I like it. That's just me.
Yeah. So explain that. What is that? So it's fermented, right?
It's basically, so what happens is, uh that stage that I talked about, where the when you squeeze the kernels for barley, for oats, it comes out, it's kind of nice and doughy.
Fresh.
It's
Okay.
nice kind of dough type. The leaves, the plants are kind of this golden green color. It's quite a color. And that means it's the right stage. It's the right stage for the nutrient value. It's also right stage for the amount of crop they're going to get off for the
Okay.
silage pit. So when that's cut, it's chopped up. It's chopped up at a certain length, and then they get packed into this pile. And the tractor, big four-wheel drive tractor, like, four wheels on each, and gotta go in there and pack it well so that there's no oxygen. It's
Okay.
basically kind of like making pickles, where you're making
Okay.
pickled cucumbers where they
Yeah.
cannot have any oxygen in the system at
Okay.
all.
Like a sauerkraut.
Yeah, like sauerkraut. And the micro the bacteria are already there, so there's nothing need to be added. The bacteria go in there, are in there, and they start, the oxygen bacteria, they use up that oxygen, and then until that oxygen is used up, which does not take very long, they shut down. And then there's the lactic acid bacteria, which take over because it's anaerobic environment. And then they get going, and they use the material to basically pickle it. And after usually takes about 2-3 months, for that pickling process to happen in that silage pit. And then by that time, the stuff is ready to feed. So it's kind of a, um, the only reason silage is able to be done, and is because of plastic, because the invention of plastic has enabled us to preserve forage, uh, and utilize that anaerobic environment, which is very, very similar to what happens in the rumen, in order to better preserve that feed. And it can
Gotcha.
be preserved for a long time if it's
Wow.
if it's done if it's done well.
So if I
Yeah,
understand, that right, I mean, it's essentially making that grains or that feed more bioavailable, right? It's essentially pre-digesting it a bit. Sound kind of the same way that it does with us a little bit.
yeah.
So, and is that used then to finish them? Is that used to finish the cattle?
No,
When is that used? Oh, it's not. Okay, good question.
it it can be fed to cows. It can be fed to those backgrounding steers.
Okay,
Um, but when it comes to finishing cattle, like in the conventional sense,
okay,
grain is primarily used.
gotcha. Okay, so,
And
okay. So
so
sorry, just back to the silage. And so the silage is used in many other avenues. Then, like you said, calf cow as well, and then the
yeah,
background, like you were saying.
yeah, it's used in quite a few. Like even dairy producers use a lot of silage,
Okay,
and they really like using it because it's it doesn't have so high energy, has a good bit of protein, has some good minerals. You know,
okay,
I mean that kind of stuff, but it's not so energy dense, like a grain. Like
gotcha,
feeding grain. Grain is very, very high in energy. That's what puts on the fat.
gotcha.
But it's kind of that balance. It's sort of like hay, where it's a nice balance between the protein and the
Protein.
energy, where it's not going to put too much fat on, but it's going to give those animals that, those two main nutrients that they need, along with some of the minerals and that kind of thing. So
Gotcha. So I'm seeing the picture now come together. If the animal's fed right, the background and everything with the right amount of protein, it gets the right amount of muscle. Then when it's
Yeah,
time to finish, then you can add the fat. That's kind
yeah,
of how it's done, I'm
that's
assuming.
exactly how. Yeah,
So the fat that everybody wants on their steak, that comes in the last 3 months. Most of that. Is that safe to say as well? Like, I mean, the last couple months of the life.
yeah. It's well, the the finishing feedlot phase is about 3 to 4 months long.
Okay.
So what happens there is the animals come from a forage, that forage based diet, pasture, that kind of thing, and then they're slowly introduced onto a basically an 85 to 90% grain. It's, or we call it high concentrate, which is concentrate is basically grain. I mean, it's basically that. So the ration, the diet itself is 85 to 90% grain. It's by the time they're on full feed, and it takes a little bit of time. Like it's, I mean, if the feedlots, like Rick had said, I mean, they know what they're doing. They got it all down pat. But I'm thinking in terms of the amount of time, because the rumen needs time to adjust. Otherwise, they get acidosis, that kind of thing, and it takes about 2 weeks, a week to 2 weeks, I would say for those animals to get onto what we call full feed. And then that's where really that's where they're gaining anywhere from 3 to 4 pounds per day. That's
Wow.
a lot.
That's a lot.
And so that, compare that with backgrounding, where we're focused on gaining no more than maybe a pound, 2 pounds maximum per day, which seems to be like a lot, but it's not compared to doing
Yeah.
feedlot, where they're really packing it on, man.
Wow. And so the finishing itself, has that changed over the years? Has it always been grain? I mean, the most controversial thing I hear in meat, right, is the grass versus, grain finish versus grass finish. Um, and I understand that if most of the life is in grass anyway, that makes me feel a lot better on all the meat, right? Um, but really, like, has that changed? Has finishing changed? And then we'll get into all those questions we have as well.
um I think finishing has changed, hasn't changed in terms of what's being fed over the last, since the 1970s. That really hasn't changed. I believe I had, I'm not too in tune with the whole, how they operate in the field, because we don't really get much in the, I don't get much in terms of questions on the finishing, but the technology, involved in getting the perfect, the absolute right ration for the right group of animals, because the feedlots are really good at separating animals out to the basic, based on their weight. I think they might do it on breed, but not necessarily, based on their body condition, with the amount of fat that's on them, those kind of things. So they really can develop things that way. So that's really progressed in since the advent of the feedlot, since 1950s, 1970s. Not only that, but the animals have changed too. The animals themselves have become, um, more adept at being able to be fed on grain versus mostly on grass. I mean, the cow calf guys, they really like to try to have their cows primarily on grass, because grazing is always cheaper. It's
Yeah.
always cheaper than feeding, always. But when the meat packers have a huge demand for these animals that um, need to have lean muscle, they should have the lean carcass, and they have to grow fast, that kind of thing. That's where producers, the cow calf guys are kind of in this tug of war, where they have to have cows that are good on forage, but on the other hand, they got to have calves that are going to be growing well, have that, kind of that nice balance between muscle and fat, and intramuscular fat,
Yeah.
and and uh, and those other factors. So that's what's changed. And when you look at some of the old drawings from before the 1950s, where the cows, a lot of the cattle were more body than leg.
Okay.
You know, like they're square and their stumpy little legs and you know, you could just barely see them above the grass.
Yeah.
Where now the animals are so leggy and so tall, and you know, they're not the balance between the amount of space between their legs and their body is enough where you could actually open up and use a newspaper underneath them, kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know, and that's why that's a big that's it's caused, you know, that's contributed to quite a bit of a change, especially in the conventional end.
Okay.
And then that means when you're people are looking at grass fed operations, they're don't I find personally that I they don't seem to I shouldn't say all people, because most are there's some out there that are really good, but some people get caught up on the grass fed, and they think that, okay, all, you know, all cows are going to be fine on grass no matter what. That's not true. There's a lot of cattle out there that have the genetics where they're a little bit more high metabolism, where they can't do well on just grass, on, you know, on just grass pasture alone, or even if there's a little bit of legume in that feed. And when when I say that, the you know, I'm talking about those people who are so surprised, you know, that get a little bit what I call barn blind, and they don't don't see their animals going downhill on what seems to be to them some decent quality pasture, decent quality hay. And those animals, they're kind of telling them that we're not quite suited for your for the grass based farming. No, not nothing against grass based. I absolutely love it. It's just that when their animals are not matched to their operation, and they are forced to have to feed grain as a supplement to keep those animals in shape, that's where I have a problem.
Gotcha. So it's not just so cut and clear and cut that everybody's best or every animal's best on grass. It's not like that at all.
Yeah, like
Gotcha.
that's where having to people really have to do their homework. I mean, if I'm talking to producers, you know, not just consumers, but consumers should really know about this because it's
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
Um, that people have to, you know, when they're looking for cattle that are grass, that are great for grass, they got to do their homework. They got to know that the animals that they're getting are forage based, and they're not going to be so reliant on getting 3 pounds of grain per day.
Gotcha. Well, and that's interesting because it's another misconception that the average consumer like me maybe has, or the average meat eater maybe has, is that when we start looking into, okay, I decided to go to meat, I decided to get away from this other stuff. Now, what's the best meat? Well,
Mhm.
you search online, Google, the best meat is grass-fed meat, right? Or even before that, a couple of years ago, the best thing was organic, right? And then it's free range, and then grass-fed and all that stuff. So it's good to know. Like Rick always tells me that all of the meat in Canada is safe. It's all healthy. It's all good. We have regulations, we have standards. Now, lastly, before we get into the questions, do you have a personal preference on grass finished versus grain finished, or I mean, I don't know. I'll let you answer.
I've tasted both,
Okay.
and I can tell you that I've I actually prefer the grass based.
Okay.
I I've actually come from a, you know, we've a few times we've had steers where we had to keep back and slaughter, and we raised them on a little bit of grain, but with mostly forage, and they turn out to be the best tasting steers I've ever had.
Yeah.
No kidding. I've also had grass-fed Texas Longhorn beef.
Yes.
That was really good.
Yes.
So
Very good.
comparing that to the stuff we get at the grocery store, which obviously is grain fed, you know, it can't compare. It basically kind of tastes like cardboard. You got to put your spices on there in order to actually make it worth eating.
Exactly. Well, that's one of the things that I've noticed compared to grass fed versus conventional grain fed, grain finished rather, is that you're eating a piece of meat, and this piece of meat. What I mean, this cow ate grass. You just know somehow. It's it's got a taste in it. It's got a flavor in it. And it was funny. I was telling Rick, I'm like, it's funny because it almost tastes more like that lamb flavor, right? That little bit of closer to nature flavor than I had a regular or a steak from from the grocery store the day later. I'm like, man, this is nothing like the same thing. So it's fun. I keep on ordering, the lamb, and then, but yeah, no, that's interesting that you said that, because I've heard both ways, grass finish or, grain finish. And I like them both as well. I love all meat. I just, my concern as well is that it's just done right, and it's the healthiest possible. So thank you for telling that. Now I do want to get on to a couple of our questions that we have, kind of what we wanted to talk about. One of the first things was the B12 argument. I want to let you take away with that if you can. And then I want to talk about stuff like grazing land. A lot of people think about, do we have enough land to graze? Is it going to kill all the land in the world if we stop having, if we keep on growing more and more cows? So, but like you said, the B12 argument, I want to hear what you have to say about that.
Okay, well, the context of the B12 argument is a lot of vegans like to say that animals have to be supplemented with B12. Like they must be supplemented. And they include cattle in this. Actually, a lot of times vegans are adamant about saying that cattle have to be supplemented B12. And I kind of get a good chuckle because they supplement their comment with a bottle of B12 injectable and to be injected into animals. And I don't ask them, but I'm always one who loves to research. So that's a good habit to have. It's a
Yes.
dirty habit, but it's a good habit. So when I look on the label of these B12 injectables,
Okay.
I see that yeah, they are for cattle, for lambs, for hogs, and for chicken too. But then I dig a little bit deeper and I find that um, most of the time these B12 shots need to be done are if they're young calves. And let me get into that because that's important. The rumen of a calf is not born with a rumen.
Whoa, I did not know that.
They actually only develop their rumen and fully mature the room. They fully develop their rumen by the time they're 3 months old.
Wow.
So in animal science class, we always do dissections and all that. And don't get me started on that one. They always have too much fun, let me say.
Yeah.
And one of the things when he looked at the digestive system of a calf that was stillborn, um, the calf was digestive system was basically similar to ours.
Wow.
In other words, that the stomach, the abomasum, which is the true stomach of a ruminant, it was the most pronounced stomach that was there. And if there was a teeny, if you see anything, a rumen, the omasum or the reticulum, very very tiny. There's a pea, just a pea size on there on in that digestive system. So that so and it so that means that the calf, it takes a bit of time. It takes this little bit of supplement with some hay, with maybe a little bit of grain if they're that, um, and it takes 3 months for that calf to develop a rumen. So that means that you're basically treating that baby calf as a monogastric.
Gotcha.
And because you're treating that calf as monogastric, you're treating it like a chicken or a pig or a dog or a cat or a human, where they have to get their B12 from outside sources, which are basically animal protein. So calf, if they're not getting their B12 from the mother's teat, from suckling in the milk, which is where a lot of the bacteria is gonna come from. They're gonna get that in them. And then they have to be, eh, and it's too if they're sick. I mean, they need that injection. It's the same with baby lambs. Lambs, they're the same thing as calves. There's this only 2 or 3 months. No, I think it's sooner for lambs because I'm not entirely sure, but I think it's sooner because they're a little bit more, a little bit of different growth than cattle. I'm not expert on sheep, so don't quote me on that. But I do know there's a certain time, maybe 2 months. I may be wrong in that, where lamb is also going to be having that mature rumen. So it's kind of the same thing.
Okay.
Now, when when it comes to a mature cow with a fully functional rumen, the the need for a B12 shot is virtually unnecessary. The only exception is that if that animal was sick and was sick where the sickness compromised the rumen microflora, so that the bacteria, the protozoa, the fungi, especially the bacteria that are responsible for synthesizing B12. And so if they had something like acidosis where the pH gets so low in the rumen where it destroys a lot of the good bacteria in that rumen, and it produces so much lactic acid producing bacteria, which is not good for the animal. They go into the acidotic, their blood pH in their system, and then they just they're not treated, they die. So in instances like that, that's where B12 is needed, or else they're getting a vial of rumen fluid from a healthy animal, from a cannulated healthy animal. They already have um, they're the example animal where they had a fistula put into them where person can reach into the room and grab. And a lot of the research people do, they cannulate their cows, and that doesn't hurt them. And that's where the animal needs that B12. Now, for a healthy animal, it's not necessary. What's necessary is supplement, is especially in an area where a certain mineral is deficient for those animal. That's where they're going to be, that's where they're going to be needing that mineral, and that mineral is called cobalt. And cobalt is that mineral that's needed for the microbes to synthesize from cobalt to vitamin B12. And vitamin B12, the other word for that vitamin is called cobalamin.
Yep,
And
absolutely.
so basically throwing out a blue salt block, which is basically salt with iodine and cobalt, or else a salt block that has a trace minerals, your iron, zinc, selenium, I should know these, iodine, and cobalt, and a few other essential minerals are needed for that animal. And it's especially in the cobalt area. I mean, in Alberta, we are technically in a cobalt deficient area. There's not much research that points exactly, but from a number of feed tests that have been done back in the 80s and 70s, most feeds have pretty much 98% of all feeds that have come back, and I'm pretty sure it's the same in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, have come back that are cobalt deficient for cattle. So supplementing, feeding those cattle the free choice salt block with cobalt in it solves your B12 problems.
Yeah. So do you think, Karen, do you think historically those same lands were probably not deficient, and they were probably just, is it because they were just in better states over, like, I mean, have we wrecked the soil is what I'm getting at? Or is it like, because how did we have ruminant animals roaming, years past if they would have been deficient? Do you have an idea about that?
Another can of worms. It's
Or
very
is the monocropping that kills everything? That's what I'm getting at.
that's a complex subject because for one thing, it's with lambs and calves, a lot of when they're raised indoors in an indoor environment, they have to be fed. They basically have to be given certain feeds, and there's possibility that if they are being fed whole milk from ewes or from cows, that it may not have may not have that vitamin B12 or the bacteria that synthesize B12 in their for their systems. Um, so that may be a thing. Now, as far as the soil is concerned, with animals that are raised outdoors, It's a possibility that we have contributed to it, but we're not entirely sure because we've been, I mean, especially here in Canada, and I can speak for south of the Medicine Line too, south of the border, that we've been here. White settlers have moved in here since for the last like 200 years now, something like that. And we come over from Europe. We brought over our values and our traditions and everything else. And the way we graze is no different what's considered optimal normal in wetter Europe. And so it's possible, but it's really hard to say whether or not it has contributed to that, because we it may have already been cobalt deficient when we first arrived. Same for iodine. I could speak on iodine. The prairies have been well known to be iodine deficient when settlers, because settlers have been reported to have goiter, and the only way they could get fix that was either they'd have get some iodine from the doctor, or and sooner or later the salt that they got was became iodized so that they get that iodine. So the other thing is that soils are so different and diverse, and they all have a different level of chemical constituency, different mineral profile. And so also, I mean, there's for just I'm speaking in Alberta because that's my home territory. Is that we're going from southern Alberta, which is a brown soil zone, which is um, it's a little bit different from when you head more north, where there's the gray, there's the gray soils on the wooded soils on. And I'm not a soil scientist, so I don't know exactly the mineral profile itself, but that's moving different from north to south. And even in the Rockies, there's different in there. So the other thing is that animals, especially our livestock, they're limited in where they can go. The old ancient bison herds, they could move from way up north, way north to Taiga, to almost to the Arctic Circle, not quite, to all the way down south to almost to Mexico. And
So they
they,
went where the food was, probably, right?
yeah, and they've also been able to move to places where there's uh, certain minerals available to them so that they can lick and they can satisfy their cravings. Um, Compared to other areas where they couldn't do that. So, for instance, if they come up to Drumheller area, which has this what's called bentonite clay, and bentonite clay is very mineral rich. Those bison could get in there, lick, eat that some of that clay, especially if some of the cows or the bulls were craving that, and they get their minerals and then they move on, kind of thing. So that's the freedom they have. And I mean, that's the wild animals. It's the same thing with antelope, with deer, with wolves, foxes, songbirds, your raptors, all those kind of things. So but with our livestock, they don't have that luxury,
Yeah,
and they're quite limited in where and if where they can go and to get their minerals. So we humans have to be the ones responsible to give them what they need so that they can remain healthy and not get toxicities or deficiencies.
absolutely. Well, thank you. So Karen, leads me to the next question. Do we have enough land for all these animals, right? One of the things that you hear a lot is how much land do we need, grazing land? Do we have enough grazing land in the whole country? We have a big country, but do we have enough land? That's a good question.
I see, yes.
Yeah.
Off the top.
Okay.
Um,
And
I
maybe you can talk about, like, why is it so easy to assume we don't have enough land, or I don't know,
like
why is that message being given? Yeah, it's interesting.
definitely get into that. Um, how should I begin? Because this is another can of worms to get open up. Um, I think I'll maybe start talking about how people, because I think that's the easiest, is kind of start from the beginning, how people think that um, um, we don't have enough land. And the base, okay, so starting from there, it's the way animals, cattle, not just cattle, horses, sheep. goats, that kind of thing. Have it's the way they've been grazed, and the mainstream, much accepted, too much accepted, which is changing now, thankfully, little by little. Um, Traditional, colonial, et cetera, method of grazing has been what I talked earlier about, the Columbus method, which is you get a huge piece of land, put them out in the spring, and you discover them in the fall. That came from Greg Judy, and I quote him from that because that was an amazing thing. I had to remember that.
Now, just
So,
so before you get any further, does that actually happen? Like to the layperson like me, do farmers do that?
oh yeah,
Wow. Okay, there you go. So I didn't know that.
yeah,
Okay.
it happens. Um, so that
Continue.
another word for that is it's called continuous set stock grazing.
Okay.
So that's where the animals are, like I said, they're let out in a big area, and they're allowed to pick and choose whatever they plants they want to eat, whenever they want to eat them, and they're free to move around. The thanks to the farmers, there's no predators to keep them bunched up, so they spread out like they basically they thanks to the too much predator pressure, human laziness, human stupidity, that kind of thing. The animals are become lazy themselves, and they lost that herding instinct, you know. And
It's too safe for them, probably.
yeah, and that's become so accepted, and that we're it's so normal that um, when people are faced with a alternative grazing system where uh, I can't quote Joel Salatin's mob stalking carbon solar conversion, so on and so forth. That kind of grazing system where the animals are mobbed up in a big group and they're moved around very quickly.
Hmm.
So and when people are
Like a
introduced,
multi-paddock system, you mean, or like a
yeah,
this?
self grazing. It goes by so many different names.
Yeah.
High stock density grazing, that kind of thing.
Okay.
When people are introduced to that alternative, they kind of go, "Whoa, hang on here. This doesn't make any sense. I don't want to accept this." It's kind of their paradigm thing. um, and and as a result of that, they consider that continuous form of grazing, continuous set stock grazing, as that's what everybody does. That's how everybody's going to be doing it. That's how grazing management is.
Gotcha.
And in that context, then they think that, okay, because of that, it takes so much land, a lot of land to graze, say, um, 50 cows. So in our area, the normal stocking rate for 50 head for 4 months of the year could be around, let's see, our area is about half, so that's say 200-300 acres for the whole season for 50 head of cattle, for 50
Wow.
cows. That's a lot.
That seems like a lot of land.
And when people think about that, then they think, and they do the math based on those stocking rates, based on that kind of grazing system. Then they think, oh, we can't, we're we don't have enough land to graze all those animals.
Huh.
And then you get bullshit like cowspiracy,
Yeah.
quoting that same kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then the other aspect of that is that with the alternative grazing system, the other thing is that people are kind of surprised where a better grazing system actually grows more grass.
Huh.
And when you get a set stock system where every 5 years the pasture's got to be turned over, it's got to be rejuvenated, reseeded, so that it'll grow again. Because with overgrazing, the animals that are overgrazing, undergrazing, uh, under understocking, overresting, that's unsavory. It's kudos to him. Partial rest and total rest. Uh, when the animal, it's not being pushed hard enough. It's the animals are not being mobbed and up enough. Those basically the pasture declines in productivity. The amount of forage that's available for the animals to eat goes way downhill, and then that pasture has to be tilled up again or reseeded in order to bring that pasture back up again. But then they're shooting themselves in the foot again by doing the exact same thing,
Oh my
putting the
gosh.
animals out, freedom for all, and then again another 5 years they got to do the same thing again.
Okay.
So uh, so when you get this different system where the animals are mobbed up and they're not overgrazing and they're not letting the plants rest too much so that they don't um, uh, put down so much dead material or graze too much where the roots are so close to the surface that they can't take any kind of weather extremes like too much rain or too little rain.
Okay.
um then I'm trying to think where my thoughts going on this.
Yeah, I know it's good. You say about the too much land. It's like as you're using this system, you're going to be moving that land
Yeah,
as it's like limited time grazing. I guess what you're saying.
yeah, like when the animals are okay, when the animals are allowed to graze only a certain amount and they trample the rest, and there's still enough of green solar panel left for the plants to quickly recover, then that means that even more grass is going to come, even more forage is going to come. And when people are faced with that, it's just like kind of throws them for a loop.
Yeah, it's just hard to accept the fact that with cows walking around stomping on the grass, that's actually going to help the grass more. Right?
Exactly.
Not only are I mean they're fertilizing it, they're stomping on, it, they're driving it in. I mean that's yeah makes sense. And then the other thing as well about every 5 years, I mean they're gonna have to regenerate that soil again. How many? I mean I'm sure Joel Salad and all them they talk about the inputs. How many inputs is that going to take now to bring that soil back into condition that you needed at or that
Fuel,
area?
fuel, fertilizer, tillage, and then grass, and then you got to buy the seed.
Yeah,
That's
money.
basically that's money. That's very costly.
Yeah.
Whereas putting in a fence, putting up electric wire, putting in those animals, so much cheaper.
Yeah, but using your brain more and using your dollars less, right?
Yeah, it's way more management. Like it's very much intensive management, whereas the other system, the continuous system, is pretty much lazy management, or
Mm.
lack thereof management. Like you're just doing the animals, letting the animals do their thing.
How much less land could you potentially need to do this system? Like, say, I think you mentioned something like a couple hundred acres with 50 cattle. Like, how many? I don't know.
Well,
If those
if
numbers are right, I don't know.
yeah, like if like I'm talking about in where I live right now, um, if the animals were tightened up, the grazing system where they're mob grazing,
Okay.
um, that can have in some areas it can be like half the acres.
Wow.
Other areas where you get more rainfall, it can be maybe a third of that
Really?
acre where they get. And the people think that there's only so much grass can grow at a time. Well, actually, we don't really know that, because I've talked to guys where they're not too sure when the grass is going to quit, and where it's actually going to reach a peak of how much grass they can actually get. Maybe
Really?
it will reach a peak at some point in time, but they get so surprised at how much um more land is freed up from just managing differently. They tell me, I've been told by a couple that have really changed their management, and they said it's the way they manage has allowed them to basically buy another ranch for free. It's basically the same ranch.
Wow.
It's just that it's double the production, or maybe down in Carolina and that area, it's probably more like triple the production,
Wow.
just because they just manage it differently. So
Well,
that
so yeah, so that
that's
blows the that is big, and that blows the question or the I guess the criticism that we it's going to take more land to do it right. It's actually less land potentially. And then here's the other question: isn't most of the land? I mean, maybe I'm just naive, but isn't most of the land in North America meant for grazing? Like, isn't most of the land in the world probably better suited for grazing as opposed to crops? I
yeah.
mean, or is
Most
that just the simplistic way of looking at it? But
yeah. No, it's most of it is it seems to be like suited for grazing. Like a lot of land that has been put up put up as crop is a lot of it's marginal land. Um and it's been kind of out of desperation of trying to take get more land so that more money can be had in the short term for from more annual crops.
gotcha.
And sadly, that's been at a compromise of some great grazing opportunities, some especially if those those poor guys that are strapped for cash, it's no fault of their own. They're just part of the system
Yeah.
that they're stuck in, and it's kind of a bummer because that all that good good grazing land that they plowed under, that's they had so much potential for even more forage production, even more cattle that they could graze, with not as much inputs as they be putting in, to grow canola or wheat
Yeah.
or south of the border corn and soybeans.
Mm.
Um, that would really free them up, but they're just stuck in the system. They don't know any better,
Yeah.
so they're just kind of do what they think is best and doing what they know is best, which is kind of sad.
Yeah. Well, I guess fortunately or unfortunately, I mean, the market's going to probably push them eventually, right? It seems like things are changing as far as where we want to where we get our meat from. We want to know where it comes from. One of the other questions I want to ask you about was mostly or oftentimes I get not necessarily criticism, but a lot of times I get questions on isn't most of the grains that we produce or isn't most of the crops we produce fed to cows or fed to cattle? Do you have a take on that? I mean, yeah. I mean, is there some truth to that? Is there not? Like, is it because of the system we're in, or yeah?
Well, I kind of want to go back to
Okay.
kind of the land thing again, because
Sure.
land argument again, because um you'd asked before this last question about um the cropland that was plowed under for grass.
Okay.
There's a lot of land, a lot of cropland that could potentially go back into pasture, go back to rangeland, and that would really help um, with boosting the amount of land available for grazing livestock. Just not just like I'm talking, not just cattle. It's your domestic animals. It's also for the benefit of wildlife. I mean, the amount of land that's been turned over for crop has been depressing, because that's a big impact on songbirds, especially grassland songbirds, where that's the only place they can, grasslands are the only place they can go. There's, you know, that's it's kind of depressing when their habitat is lost. Um, and and it's just, when I just lost my train of thought
No,
again.
that's okay. You wanted to say about I was getting into the corn, but you were saying about just if more of the land that we're using can actually go back to grazing. So are you saying that did we actually change the land that was grazing for crops? Did we actually, like, what did we do? Did we alter the land that much from the original?
Well, it's when going from grazing, like it's basically just destroying all the diversity, all that rangeland diversity. It's gone. Like it's no
Okay.
longer. It's replaced by just one species, a monoculture of canola, wheat, corn, soybeans, and there's basically nothing for those animals to get from, except those opportunistic animals that will take advantage of that one crop and go off of, like, for instance, deer love canola. They
Yeah.
you get big antlers off of canola. I've seen some pretty big bucks out,
Mm.
but um, but it's just sad because there's just so much potential, and like I said, it's a lot of it's because the farmers are left with um, no knowing of anything better to do. So it's just not great. So, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's just with if there's a lot of that cropland that should never have been that should never have been made as cropland, that should have been just stayed as grassland, as a savanna, and probably even forest too, because I mean that's also important. That would really help with increasing the amount of land area.
Okay.
Okay, so now the grain part of livestock. I need a sip of water here.
Let me know if we beat the dead horse. No pun intended.
No, it's a good question because I've been asked that question too much,
And then
and
before you into so I spent a year in Iowa after high school, and there was nothing but corn around me. And even I was told that most of that corn was actually going to the cattle back then. So I don't know. I didn't eat corn very much when I was there, but everybody else did. So I don't know if that segue doesn't hurt. um,
well, when you talking of, I think people seem to think that amount of grain is in terms of the CAFO, the combined animal feeding operations, or the other words is factory farms. So because factory farms and this are take up quite a big chunk of agriculture now than they have in the past, then yeah, then there's going to be a lot more of that grain feeding happening. Feedlots are certainly grain gluttons. They take in a lot of grain. I was at home back home where I come from, drove by the feedlot, and there were two big B trains, big grain trucks that were pulling in to unload their barley that they got from wherever that was. I'm not sure where they got it from, but yeah, it does take up a bit. So it is kind of true. But however, there's and globally, like if you're talking on a global scale, it's not quite true. Like the FAO did a study on this, and it's great they did that because it was much needed. And they found that only 18% of what most livestock eat are 18% are grains, or what could be edible to humans, whereas the rest of what the animals have been eating are not edible. So that's that a lot of big chunk are forages, um, and byproducts and that kind of thing. So that's pretty thankful with that. But the other thing with when it going back again to the grains is that there is potential for most of those grains to be edible, and this could cause a bit of comments. And if you post it to YouTube, I would be surprised. But anyway,
Always go to
um,
YouTube.
yeah, the a lot of the grains that are uh, fed to livestock a lot of them are deemed as feed grade, and when they're deemed a feed grade, they're not suited to be put into the human consumption chain. So it's basically just a grading system that different grain boards have.
So like a lower quality for
Yeah,
animals, higher
they're
for humans.
basically lower. Yeah, they're basically a lower quality
Okay.
grain. Then that when they're deemed that, then most of them are going to be either they're going to be fed to livestock, or if they're really bad, like if they something happened in the storage, where they're in the bin, they get so badly heated or so wet, or they get moldy, then they're just going to be buried. But that doesn't happen so often. It's just that there's the lower quality grains basically are fed to animals, and it's not too common where the better quality, the high quality, like the durum wheat, or the great quality canola is going to be fed to animals. So um, the other the other thing is that animals are going to be getting a lot of the byproducts. Byproducts is a little bit of a different story.
Yeah.
Um, I Speaking of byproducts and grains, I kind of chuckle at a vegan who said that most canola is fed to livestock. And I thought, no. I actually wrote a response and I said, that's not true. That's
Yeah.
bullshit. And the reason, and then I explained that canola is an oil seed. Soybean is also an oil seed. So it has a very high oil content. And cattle especially are very sensitive to the amount of oil they can get in a diet. It can really cause some digestive upset issues, which are not great for them. So they can only eat so much if they are fed canola. Um, the other thing with that is that most canola, a huge portion of canola is grown for oil. It's extract, the oil, the canola is uh, sent to these plants where the oil is extruded from the canola, and what's left over, which is a canola meal, which is very high protein feed, is what's fed to livestock. It's very much the same with soybean. So I mean, grown for oil, what's left over is fed to animals because it's that high protein feed, which is great for hogs, great for chickens, for cattle. If the feeds that they're given are not meeting their protein needs, it's a nice little supplement with that. But that doesn't mean that uh, all that canola that's being grown is actually being fed to livestock. So context is very important, and perspective is very
Absolutely.
crucial.
Especially when I want a bit of a crusade against seed oils to begin with. So yes, absolutely. I appreciate that. Thank you. Um, Other than that, is there anything that maybe you can share with us around maybe the different ruminants, or like, I don't know, like do, or even just around, I mean, actually you tapped into something there that I'm interested in, like the roles of the ruminants, or the roles of animals that can digest this food, right? It's, I think we lose sight of that sometimes, on how valuable they are to us, right? And how valuable they are to farmers, even if you're growing other crops, right? Like, I say this sometimes as a joke, but you need manure to grow anything. Where does manure come from, right? So maybe if you could expand on that.
Oh, so yeah, the ruminants, uh they're amazing at basically converting what we cannot eat into what we can eat, which is, what's they give their milk, and after we kill them, the organs and the meat, meat that comes off of, and that's the most nutritious food that you can actually get. No, you can't even compare. Plants can't even compare. I mean, people think, oh yeah, plants, you can get that. No, no. Not when you're looking at amino acids and all that, and that kind of thing. So ruminants are so crucial in that, and they utilize areas where of land, going back to land again, they utilize areas of land where you can't even grow crops. It's either too stony, soil too thin, topography is too steep, it's too wet or too dry or whatever. It it's just, the land is just not suited for putting a tractor on there. Whereas with the animals, they got hooves, they got legs, they can move, and they're really great. Like sheep and goats are great at climbing.
Imagine.
Especially notorious for that. Cattle not so much. Depends on the breed though. Um, but but they're just amazing at turning, utilizing those areas where we just don't know what else to do with them. Where
Yeah.
where we can't put a tractor in there, where it's stupid to put a tractor in there because of the wildlife, because there's sensitive wildlife habitats, certain uh, bird species, like there's burrowing owls, or there's sage grouse, or Sprague's pipit, or there's just different animals, even gophers, or even elk, and they have their particular areas where they need to graze, and we need and there's been studies, especially when looking at elk. There's been studies done where cattle grazing has actually benefited elk, because the cattle were able to go in there and eat some of the forage that the elk won't eat, and that we're actually impacting the
Wow.
certain shrub species that the elk relied on for their wintering grounds. And then when the cattle were able to help kind of clear things out in a way of speaking, then the elk thrived from that.
Wow.
And so that's where cattle, I know I'm speaking in cattle, but I mean sheep and goats are also very beneficial for that as well.
Wow.
People are condemned ranchers for shooting, shooting wildlife, and they make it sound like ranchers are against wildlife, and cattle grazing is anti-wildlife. Like that couldn't be further from the truth. There's I worked one of my rangeland, as part of my rangeland, um, as a research assistant, working down in southern Alberta on the prairies, and one of the research stations was a 16,000 acre ranch. And every single day that I went out there was not a day where I didn't see any wildlife.
Wow.
I saw endangered long-billed curlews who were, they needed the grassland to nest. They would not nest anywhere else. They need the open grasslands to nest. And I was pretty fortunate to see a pair, maybe no, not just one pair. There's about two pair of long-billed curlews out there peeping at me, getting mad at us, get too close to their nest. That was
Wow.
so cool, and get a picture of that. And ducks, I mean, there's wetlands out there for ducks. There was pronghorn antelope around there. There's even moose and elk that were around there. I saw a half dozen beautiful mule deer bucks with some
Oh,
beautiful antlers on them. They're just
beautiful.
in velvet. And the question that probably comes from a lot of people that think that ranchers are against wildlife. They think that, oh, the cattle are going to be eating so much forage that there's nothing left for the wildlife. Well, that's when you're managing right, when you're managing for wildlife, and for cattle, you're making sure that the animals are not going to be taking 100% of what's there. There's always going to be plenty left over for those antelope, for the for the deer, for the birds, and all them to be able to make a living, live their lives, and thrive themselves, and do very well out there. I mean, same with insect, pollinators, native bees, butterflies. The list goes on, and I think that the cow, livestock are actually very necessary for helping with that, because Alan Savory had talked about how livestock are a proxy for the old ancient bison herds, and that is so true, because land is so fragmented today. It's people forget about that, and that kind of irks me so much, because oh, we're gonna, let's leave all the bison out, let's let them all free. Oh, come on, people, think about all the roads, all the infrastructure, all the fences, all the pipe, not just pipelines, but cities, towns, farmsteads. That is, there's so much fragmentation out there. It's not even funny.
Mm-hmm.
Those animals, those bison, cannot roam like they have 200 years ago. It's impossible. So the bison are really great on areas where there's where there's thousands of acres for them to roam. Like Grasslands National Park is perfect for them. Banff National Park, where they have 100,000, 300,000 acres to roam. I mean, that's perfect for them. But when you're kind of stuck with only like say 100 acres or only 50 acres or that kind of thing, livestock, domesticated ruminants are the best choice to help humans manage those acres. Like even just a few thousand acres, that's not enough for a bison herd. I mean, bison are, they have their benefits. Yes, they can move around. They're pretty good that way. But there's the other aspect of that is people forget that there's the people part of it. People forget the people part of it, which is also irks me big time, because we've caused a fragmentation. We've caused a lot of issues, but on the other hand, we are also responsible for helping fix things, for helping to restore the environment, to regenerate the environment, and to help with improving wildlife habitat. And we have no other tool to help improve wildlife habitat except livestock. And if people woke up more to that biological tool, that domesticated biological tool that we have, that's going to really help move things forward. We have no other technology that can compare to the ruminant animal. No other technology, no car, no computer, no robot, nothing. All we have are those animals. And people who think that we should let cows go extinct are bullshit.
Well, I know, Karen, I'm glad you said that, because that's
Talking
a
about
perfect way. I think that's a perfect way to kind of wrap this up. But in closing as well, one of the things that I always kind of feel when just the same things you're talking about is that oftentimes people feel, or they act like we're separate from nature. We're not. We're not outside looking in at nature, right? We're part of nature, and we have to play with nature. We have to, I mean, if we are stewards of the earth, we have to, it's our responsibility, right? Just as you said. So I appreciate what you're doing. Thank you so much, Karen. And thank you for
Thank you,
loading us with
Carla.
all this information. Thank you so much. I hope my listeners took notes. Any kind of parting words you can leave with us, or any, I don't know. I mean, you can share your website, right? So it's www.bovinepracticum.com.
Yep. Yeah, my website it's primarily bovine focused. I also talk a bit about bison. I like bison. I'm a big fan of bison. Equal fans with bison is with cattle. So that's kind of the bovine, the bovidae, that kind of thing. I've got on that website, people can check it out. It's a ruminations blog. The ruminations blog is great for people that are curious about certain myths. I'm adding a lot more stuff on there slowly but surely. I kind of take my time doing that. I also have a Q&A section where there's commonly asked questions about cattle. I put in there, and then there's a keeping raising cows blog, where it's mainly for beginner, not just beginner, but people who are raising cattle who have quite, may want to know certain things, everything from reproduction, feeding, ham and cattle, that kind of thing. It's a new one. It's steadily growing little by little.
Cool.
It's a nice website where I just can share all my knowledge about my passion for bovines. I wish it could be a bit more sheep, but people like their sheep and goats because they're small ruminants. They're beautiful little ruminants.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, my knowledge is limited. Rick
Well,
he'll take over the sheep bed where I am.
that's right. Well, time will tell. I'm sure it's going to expand over time. Thank you again, Karen. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for chatting with us, and my listeners, I'm sure they're going to love this. So let's circle back again, maybe in a few months. We'll get Rick on with us, and I know he wants to pick your brain again. So we'll get chatting online.
Double thing. That would be awesome.
Exactly. Awesome. Well, thanks again, and have a great night. We'll chat very soon.
All right. Thanks, Carlo.